Hey guys, it's Cece and welcome to my January wrap-up. So in today's video, I'm going to wrap up all of the things that I read in the month of January. I read 9 things total. One of those was a graphic novel and 4 of them were rereads, so I'm going to talk about those things. But also, since I set myself some monthly goals this year, I thought I would just let you know how those are going. So a couple of the goals I set for myself were that 1, I read all of the books on my top 15 to read in 2017 list, and the other one is that I have to read at least one 2017 release every single month. Now, unfortunately, I did not touch that top 15 to read in 2017 list. From now on, I will be reading at least one every month, but I did read a 2017 release, so I can check that one off. And I will tell you what that 2017 release is when we get to it in this wrap-up, which we should just start right about now, I think. So the first book that I read in the entire year, the very first thing that I read was Buffering Unshared Tales of a Life Fully Loaded by Hannah Hart. This is, of course, Hannah Hart's memoir. It came out last year, and I got it for Christmas, so I gladly picked it up. I have sort of set myself a trend over the last few years to either end the year or begin the year on a memoir of a famous lady I admire, so this is just following that trend. Hannah, in case you don't know, is a YouTuber. That's how she got started, was here on YouTube, and I will leave the link to her channel down in the description below, but she started off doing videos called My Drunk Kitchen and has been on YouTube for a very long time now. This book was a little bit about that, but it was a lot about her growing up, and it was so good and so impressive. I was just really impressed by how raw and honest this book wound up being. Considering the vibrant and bright personality that Hannah Hart has, it's a little bit difficult at times to imagine the ways that she grew up, and they were difficult, very difficult. She took a lot of excerpts from her diaries, which she's kept for most of her life, and some of those came across as a bit over the top for me, but hey, who am I to criticize how you write in your own diary? In general, I really enjoyed this book, and I loved getting to know Hannah more because she's a person I super duper admire. She has an entire chapter about how she realized she was gay in college, which, you know, relevant to me. And that was just an incredibly good chapter, as well as the rest of the book was incredibly good. If you know Hannah at all, I think that you will enjoy this. If you don't, then I think you should read this and then go check her out on YouTube. Overall, I gave this 4 stars, really enjoyed it. The next book that I want to talk about is A Mortal Song by Megan Crewe. This book was actually sent to me by the author a few months ago, and I have been so behind on review books that I didn't get to it until January, which makes me a very terrible person, and I'm sorry. This book takes place in modern-day Japan. It follows a girl named Sora. Now, while this does take place in modern-day Japan, a bunch of it also takes place on Mount Fuji, and there is this collection of people called kami. Sora has grown up as the daughter of the 2 kami who rule over this community, and then one day she finds out she actually isn't their daughter at all. She is a human who has been raised to believe she was someone different in order to protect the actual daughter. So while she has been raised to think that she is a chosen one of sorts, she is suddenly faced with the fact that she isn't at all, and instead she just has to help the actual chosen one in this scenario. This was an interesting book, but ultimately I found it a little bit forgettable. I only read this at the beginning of the month, and I had to kind of remind myself of some of the finer points of it as I was preparing for this video. The best part of this book easily is Sora. She is a fantastic main character, and you really get to go through the emotional arcs of her finding out that she's not who she thought she was, finding out her parents aren't who she thought they were, and it never turns into girl hate, which is something I was very, very concerned about. It never turns into resentment for her in regards to the person who actually is the chosen one. Instead, they build up a really nice friendship. Also, this book had such ample opportunity to go either the love triangle route or the jilted best friend route, and it did neither. It had super healthy relationships, to be honest with you, and I applaud that. Unfortunately, all that messing with tropes, while done really well, just didn't hold the story up very much. I wound up, like I said, finding it kind of forgettable plot-wise, so if you do want to read a book that messes a lot with tropes, then I recommend this one. Plus, this book was very well researched, and you can find out a lot more about how Megan Crewe researched this area and the culture she was drawing on her website, but it is not own voices, as a warning. It was well researched, but not own voices. I personally gave this like a 3 or a 3.5 stars. It was good, but I just don't think I'll be returning to it. After that, I reread the first 4 Series of Unfortunate Events books. I only have 2 here. So I reread The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, The Wide Window, and The Miserable Mill. Like I said, these are the first 4 books in the Series of Unfortunate Events series by Lemony Snicket, and last time I read them I was like 9 years old, so it has been a good long time since I've gotten into these. If you don't know the plots of these books, in the very first book, the Baudelaire children are out on a place called Briny Beach when a friend of theirs comes and informs them that their parents have perished in a terrible fire. They are then sent to live with their closest living relative, who turns out to be an evil man named Count Olaf, who is very much after the large fortune their parents have left behind. Things do not look up from there. This is called A Series of Unfortunate Events. It is a great middle grade series that I adored when I was a kid, and I reread these 4 in preparation for the show, the first season, which premiered on Netflix in January. If you want my thoughts in great detail, I have done a discussion video about each individual book as well as the episodes they correspond to. They are part of my A Series of Unfortunate Discussions video series, which I will leave the link to the playlist for on the screen somewhere if you want to go watch them. Overall, I gave these books between 3.5 and 4 stars overall, just from book to book. They're fun, they're great, they don't talk down to children, which I really appreciated when I was younger. They have very intelligent language and really fantastic main characters, so I'm still a huge fan of this series, and I was very glad that I got to reread these 4 in January. Next up, I read Giant Days Volume 2. This is a comic series by a variety of people. Okay, it was created and written by Allison, and then it was illustrated by Lissa, Treiman, and Max Sarin. So that is the creators of this comic series. This is basically just a slice of life comic series about these 3 girls, their first year at university, and it's a lot of fun in general. The first volume was really great, hilarious. It has a lot of really great feminist content. Plus the art itself is beautiful. It's all this very vibrant color that's like here on the front. So this is some of the stuff that you'll find inside. This is one of my favorite panels, actually. I discussed this graphic novel with a few other judges when I did the YA BookTube Awards. I did 2 live shows this last month, and I will leave the link to those down in the description below if you want to go see what we thought. But this was definitely one I enjoyed. Not my favorite. Lumberjanes was my favorite that I read for the YA BookTube Awards, but it definitely took 2nd place. I think it is fun and original. One of the lead girls is queer, and I adore her. In general, this is just a super fun comic series that I definitely recommend, and I gave this volume 4 stars, just like the first one. Also for the YA BookTube Awards, I read We Are the Ants by Shaun David Hutchinson. I read this book for the LGBTQIA+ category. Again, if you want to watch that live show, the link is in the description below. This was my favorite of the 3 we read. By far, I am in love with this book. This book is about a boy named Henry, and life has not been good for him up to this point. A year earlier, his boyfriend committed suicide. His older brother is a college dropout with a pregnant girlfriend, and his grandmother is rapidly losing her memories, so he's incredibly depressed. But the other interesting thing about Henry is that since he was 13, aliens have been intermittently abducting him. And the aliens inform Henry through their own means that the world has 144 days left. It is going to be destroyed on January 29th, 2016, and he has the power to stop it. All he has to do is press this button, but he doesn't see a lot of reasons to press that button right now. That is until a boy named Diego Vega moves into town and things around him start to change. This book is absolutely beautiful, in my opinion. It describes Henry and his journeys through depression in a way that feels so deeply realistic. So a lot of this book does come across as somewhat bleak because our narrator is incredibly depressed. He's also sarcastic and funny, and his family are some of the most developed side characters that I've seen in YA in so long. I cared for every single one of them, and it took me until like less than halfway through this book to cry for the first time. There were multiple times. Henry's relationship with his mother was well written and interesting. I adore Diego, who is bisexual, I believe, possibly pansexual. He never really puts a label on himself, but he is a queer person of color. He's Latinx. This book also deals with unhealthy relationships in a really interesting way, and in general has just utterly gorgeous writing. This was the first book that I've ever read by Shaun David Hutchinson, but he's made me a huge fan in one book, and I desperately want to read some of the other stuff he's written. He has a book coming out this year called The Edge of the Universe, I believe, but I already have the 5 Stages of Andrew Brawley, maybe, on my TBR. I really want to read both of them. Shaun David Hutchinson has just made me a lifelong fan in this one, and this is Own Voices, by the way. So clearly I was enthusiastic about this. I think this is definitely going to be on my favorites at the end of the year. This is 100% going to be on my favorites list, and way to go for my first 5-star read of 2017. You did it, buddy. And the final book that I read in the month of January is Dreadnought by April Daniels, and this is the book that counted as my 2017 new release. It came out on January 24th, so you can now go and purchase it, and I will leave a link for where you can do that down in the description below. So this book was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. It was on my most anticipated LGBTQIA+ releases. It follows our main character, Dani, who is 15 years old and trans, but she is sadly in the closet. She can't come out, and then one day the superhero Dreadnought dies at her feet and gives all of his power to her. And that means not only does Dani become the new Dreadnought with all of these superpowers built into that, but it also transforms her body into the one that she has always wanted. Which on the one hand is wonderful for Dani because she gets to look the way that she has always wanted, but on the other hand, it forces her out of the closet and it forces her to confront the abusive and homophobic and transphobic home that she has been raised in. Not only that, but there is still a person out there on the loose who killed Dreadnought to begin with, and Dani's gonna have to deal with that person as well. So this is Own Voices trans fiction, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to read it, and it really impressed me. And one of the reasons I enjoyed it so much was because I think Dani is such a fascinating main character. I love her. She has so much contention inside of her in regards to how she sees herself, not just in terms of dysphoria, but also seeing herself as both brave and weak at the same time, and how she can deal with those two conflicting thoughts. The story overall balanced the superhero storyline along with Dani's personal narrative about coming out and dealing with all of that really well, and it also made it clear that Dani being a superhero, Dani being trans, and Dani being a lesbian were all part of her identity, but they didn't solely define her. There was a lot more to her than that. I would go in with some warnings that there are some incredibly transphobic characters in this book that Dani has to face, including her own father, as well as a TERF who, that's a trans exclusionary radical feminist, and she is vile. I can't. There is something so deeply upsetting to me about women who claim to be feminists who don't include trans women in their feminism, and so she came across to me as the most evil one of the bunch, despite the fact that there were actual villains out there as well that Dani had to fight, and some of the stuff that she has to say is incredibly upsetting, so just go in with warnings about that. But Dani also has a couple of really great providers of support within this world. I loved the friends that she gets, and I really loved this book. I don't think it was boring. I think it did a great job of balancing storylines, and I cannot wait for the fact that the sequel is only coming out in a few months. It's coming out in June or July. It's called Sovereign, and I am so glad that I don't have to wait an extended period of time to find out what happens next, because I really deeply enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So there you go. Those are all of the things that I read in the month of January. Please let me know in comments below what you read in January and if you enjoyed them, and if you've read any of these, please leave your thoughts about them down below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!